Okay, assalamu alaikum everyone. My name is Lara Samhan, and today we're going to talk about the physiology lecture, which is control of breathing. So basically, in this physiology lecture, we're going to focus more on the types of breathing, on how breathing actually happens, on the reflexes or the pulmonary reflexes, and we're going to talk more about the receptors like chemoreceptor, baroreceptor, and how usually we control our normal breathing. And inshallah, we're going to dissect each and every single thing in this lecture, and hopefully everything is going to be crystal clear. And if you guys have any question in regards to this lecture or in any lecture in general, in your academic year, please feel free to approach me through email or even through my mobile number. So let's get started. Okay, so basically in regards to this physiology lecture, usually physiology, like compared to other subjects, is more about just text. It's more about like words and information. So I'm gonna like talk a bit in this in this lecture, and inshallah, hopefully, like through my explanation, you guys will just need only to review the lecture like maybe once or twice, and inshallah, we're gonna just memorize and understand each and every single thing all together. So basically, in regards to the objective of our lecture, we have a couple of objectives. So here it says, I'll just use the highlighter. So here it says, for example, describe the function of the neural control centers of the breathing. So we have usually two or three neural control centers. We have the VRG, the DRG, and the pneumotaxic center. Now the VRG stands for the ventral respiratory group. What does ventral mean? Ventral means in front or anterior. In regards to the DRG, D stands for dorsal. D or dorsal means to the posterior. Okay, and in regards to the pneumotaxic center, pneumo basically means lung or breathing. So this is the meaning of the pneumotaxic center. So those three centers are basically available in the brainstem. Now, where's the brainstem? The brainstem is basically available in the central nervous system. Usually, the central nervous system is composed of two things: the brain and the spinal cord. Now, in the brain, we have the cerebrum, we have the cerebellum, and we have the brainstem. The brainstem, subhanallah, God subhanahu wa ta'ala, like kept the brainstem like a little bit deep, not onto the skull immediately compared to the cerebrum and the cerebellum. Why? Because it has a very important function in the regulating the respiration, regulating the cardiac function, and many more functions. And it also has the 12 cranial nerves. So this is why the brainstem is really very important in the cardiorespiratory regulation, and it has a very important function, and that is why it's basically protected. It's not available throughout the skull, like directly throughout the skull. So this is our first objective. Inshallah, we're going to cover it. Our second objective is basically talking more about how a patient who has bilateral diaphragm paralysis, how they usually breathe. And our third objective, we're going to talk more about the innervation of the breathing muscles, and if there's, for example, any of the injuries into the spinal cord, how things are usually regulated. And our next objective, basically, we're going to talk about the threshold, the stimuli, the nerve pathways of the chemoreceptors or the baroreceptor or the receptors in general. We have a couple of receptors. We have the baroreceptor, the chemoreceptor, the mechanoreceptors. All of them are almost considered to be a sensory receptors, and they actually sense if there's any change in the body homeostasis, and they actually use a negative feedback so that they return, so that they hopefully return the body into the normal physiological function. And then we're going to all the way cover the breathing, how it's basically elicited, and if there's, for example, any irritant or if there's any foreign body into the airway, how the body usually acts to it. We're going to also cover the oxygen therapy, how it's basically, we're going to talk more about the oxygen therapy, and we're going to talk more about the lung diseases like obstructive and restrictive lung disease. We're going to also talk about the differences between them, a very quick differences between, and an easy way to remember the obstructive and restrictive lung disease. Remember, in a restrictive lung disease, basically the lung will be more into a longitudinal shape. That means it cannot expand. Compared to the obstructive, remember obstructive, like obstructive starts with O. So like O is like a balloon. So the lung is going to be like a balloon shape, which is definitely opposite to restrictive. So restrictive, the lung will be more like a model, like a model shape. So it's going to be like it's going to be thinner compared to the obstructive, which is O. It's going to be like more too dilated or like a balloon-shaped lung. This is a very easy and quick way to remember the difference between them, like in regard to anatomically how it looks. And if you remember actually the anatomy, like how it looks, the difference between restrictive and obstructive, you can actually remember the pathophysiology of it like easier. And then lastly, inshallah, we're going to talk more about the acute and the chronic effects of the hypoxia and the hypercapnia, and we have minor differences between both of them. Inshallah, we're going to cover them, and inshallah, everything will be crystal clear. Now, let's start off with this diagram. Basically, this diagram explains the respiratory center, the afferent and the efferent inputs. So basically, what is afferent and what is efferent? Afferent, for example, let's say, مثلا, now I, for example, touched let's say something hot. So once I touch this hot thing, the impulse or the nerve that moves from my fingers, from my fingertip, all the way to the brain, for example, this is the afferent. Efferent is actually the outcome or my response to it. So my response, for example, I'm going to move my hand. So afferent is basically the input, and efferent is the output. This is just an easy way to remember it. Another easy way to remember it, just remember afferent starts with A, so A comes before E. So first we have the afferent, and then we have the efferent. Now we understood the meaning of the words, so that inshallah, once we build more and more informations in regard to this lecture, since we know like the basic information, inshallah the rest will be easier. Now in regard to this figure, it basically shows for us the brainstem. We have in here the brainstem. The brainstem is basically composed of three things. We have the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla, or we can call it as the medulla oblongata. Now our focus isn't in the anatomy of the brainstem itself as much on the pathophysiology or the physiology of it. The most important thing we're going to focus in the brainstem is basically the medulla oblongata, because it's the place where it's mostly regulating the cardiorespiratory functions, and also the pons is a bit also involved. So basically, we're going to focus more on the medulla oblongata and the pons, and the medulla oblongata has the receptors. So we'll focus more on it. Now, in regard to this figure, it basically shows for us, as we said, the brainstem and the lungs. We have afferent pathways, we have efferent pathways. It just basically shows how the lung, in compared to the afferent and the efferent pathways, is basically regulated so that we can breathe normally. And in regard to breathing, we have two processes. We have the first is the inspiration, the second is the expiration. Now, if I come to ask you, what actually takes more time? Is it the inspiration or the expiration? What do you guys think? If you can kindly answer in the chat. Any guesses? If you guys just normally breathe, we have just inspire and expire. What do you think takes more time? Okay, so actually most of you said inspiration, and actually it's vice versa. The correct answer is expiration. And for example, let's have like a couple of seconds. You just breathe in and breathe out normally. Just see, like inspiration is going to take how much time to compare to the expiration. Just let's have like 2 seconds to breathe. Okay, so you may discover that expiration actually takes a little bit more time compared to inspiration. Okay, so this is just a fun fact to that you guys, we actually thought that inspiration takes more time, but it's actually expiration which takes more time. Now, talking about the physiology of inspiration and expiration, if we want to inspire, it's basically an active process where we use our breathing muscles, which are number one, the diaphragm and the external intercostal muscle, compared to the expiration, which is a passive process. We don't usually use any of the muscles in general compared to the inspiration. So for inspiration, it's active process. We should use muscles in it, which are mainly the diaphragm and the external intercostal muscle. In the expiration, we basically use no, generally speaking, we use no any muscle, like a breathing muscle. It just happens passively. So this is the difference between the muscles used in inspiration and expiration. And since the expiration is a passive process, it just happens without using any muscle, any of the respiratory muscles. So it takes a little bit longer time. Clear? Okay, so moving on. So basically, for example, now we want to inspire. We're going to have afferent pathways. It's going to send, okay, we want to inspire in, and then the response, we're going to inspire. The lungs are going to expand, and then we're going to have, once the lung is expanded, the alveoli are filled with oxygen, we will be having the efferent, the expiration, and this is like how the inspiration and expiration happens. We have a couple of receptors. We have, for example, the gamma receptor. We're going to talk more about it, about how the how basically it's stretched once inspiration is going to happen. Once we have expiration, how it goes back. So we're going to talk more about it, inshallah, in the lecture. So basically, we have feedback, we have the negative feedback in here. For example, let's say, مثلا, if you're running and suddenly, once you're running, you need to like hyperventilate. What does hyperventilation mean? Ventilation means breathing. Hyper means high. So you need to like breathe faster. Why? So that you're going to be taking more of the oxygen compared to the carbon dioxide, because we don't want the accumulation of carbon dioxide in the body. So this hyperventilation thing is basically a negative feedback that happens, that the body regulates and the brainstem regulates, so that we want to maintain normal oxygen levels in the blood and prevent hypercapnia or hypoxia. So this is generally like what this figure basically explains. It also explains about the receptors. As we have said, we have three main receptors. Now, in regard to the baroreceptor, chemoreceptor, and mechanoreceptor, all those things, including the brainstem, how it regulates everything basically together, including the muscles, everything collaborates together so that they hopefully produce for us a normal physiological breathing without having anything pathological. And I guess that's it in this thing. So basically here it just says that the brainstem is responsible for emotions, temperature, and as we said, its brainstem is really very important to regulate the cardiorespiratory functions compared to the cortex and like the cerebellum. Okay, what else? I guess that's it in this figure. Okay, so as we know, like the normal breathing, basically, we actually breathe so that we exchange the oxygen and the carbon dioxide, and we don't want accumulation of carbon dioxide in the body, because we're going to be going into pathological processes, which can lead at the end to death of the individual. Okay, so now we're going to talk more about the neural control of the breathing, how basically the control of our breathing happens. So as we said, we have the brainstem. It's very important for cardiorespiratory regulation. Now we have over here, as we said, in regard to inspiration, it's an active process. So it requires muscles for us to breathe. The main muscles that has efferent output are basically, we have number one, the diaphragm, and the external intercostal muscle. Those are the main muscles that every individual use for inspiring. As we said, expiration is a passive process. Passive means it needs no muscles. So it just happens like automatically. And yeah, so it doesn't really require muscles like diaphragm and external intercostal muscle. Now, for example, let's say, لا سمح الله, we had a person who's a patient or a person who's actually have any pathological illness in the lungs or in the body in general, or مثلا we have somebody who's having exercise, or we have an athlete, like we have, so for whatever reason, somebody needs the muscles other than the diaphragm and the external intercostal muscle to breathe. So for example, if we don't have those extra muscles, that means خلاص يعني the person is gonna die. لا. So God subhanahu wa ta'ala just have in our nature that we're gonna have extra muscles other than the diaphragm and the external intercostal muscle for us to compensate, for our body to compensate and breathe and try as much as possible to maintain almost the exact input of the oxygen and the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide. Now, because of that, we have something called as the accessory muscles. Since we have accessory muscles, we have two accessory muscles. We have the external, or we have the expiratory and the inspiratory accessory muscles. Now, in regard to these accessory muscles, in regard to the expiratory accessory muscle, we have the abdominal muscle as well as the intercostal muscle, as well as the internal intercostal muscle, compared to the inspiratory accessory muscles, which are basically the scalene muscle, the sternocleidomastoid muscle, and the trapezius, including the external intercostal muscle. Now, subhanAllah, we have those external expiratory and inspiratory accessory muscles, so that if, for example, we are running, if, for example, somebody, as we said, is having any pathological lung illness, they can actually compensate and they can breathe if they can't only use the diaphragm and the external intercostal muscle. Same goes to a person or a patient who has a paralyzed diaphragmatic muscle. So if, for example, they have this paralyzed diaphragmatic muscle, خلاص, and they will only be using the external intercostal. No, we actually have inspiratory accessory and expiratory accessory muscles, which will definitely try as much as possible to compensate this paralyzed diaphragm and to breathe in a way that, inshallah, the oxygen is going to be almost the same inhalation as the diaphragm is as if the diaphragm is actually available. So those are basically the idea or the concept behind the accessory muscles. Okay, so now moving on. Okay, so this is basically the brainstem. We said the brainstem is going to have three parts. We have the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla. As we said, the most, like two parts that are going to be involved in the cardiorespiratory functions is basically number one, the medulla. And then after that, we have the pons. Why do we have these things? Because basically, we have in regard to in regards to the cranial nerves, as we said, we have 12 cranial nerves. Some of those cranial nerves, or the nerves in general, why are they called cranial nerves? Cranial because they are available in the cranium or in the skull, and nerves because they are nerves. So some of those cranial nerves or the receptors are basically available in the medulla and the pons. So in regard to the pons, we have, as we said, we have three things in regard to the neurons that actually help in controlling the respiration. Number one, we have the pneumotaxic center. How to remember pneumotaxic is in the pons. Remember pneumotaxic, the P is silent, so we just call it pneumotaxic. P with P, so pons is P and pneumotaxic is P, so it's available in the pons. We have the VRG, the ventral, and also we have the DRG, the dorsal. Now, in regard to this DRG, which is the dorsal, it's available in something called NTS. NTS is basically nucleus tractus solitarius. This nucleus tractus solitarius is basically a region in the medulla that has some of these structures, one of which is the DRG. It also has cranial nerves. Now we won't really focus about the cranial nerves since it's not the concept or the component of this lecture as much as we focus on the DRG, VRG, and the metaxic center. Now those three things are basically the neurons that helps in regulating the respiration. What's more really important? Is it the VRG or the DRG? All of them are actually important, but in regard to function-wise, VRG has a little bit more function than DRG, and it helps both, not only inspiration, not only expiration, but it helps both inspiration and expiration. Now, what's the function of those three things? Basically, in regard to the DRG, it helps in the integration of the input of whatever stimulus that reaches to the brain or to the brainstem. For example, we want to breathe fast, we want to hyperventilate, we want to hypoventilate. For whatever stimulus that reaches to the brainstem, the first thing to be integrated is the VRG, and then after that, it will reach to the VRG. There is intercommunication between the VRG and the DRG. Basically, in our body, subhanAllah, everything is interregulated, is interconnected. If something, for example, just isn't really functioning, the other thing is trying as much as possible to compensate. If this isn't compensating, another thing is going to compensate, and so on and so forth. So basically, there is intercommunication between the DRG and the VRG. This VRG basically helps in regulating the normal rhythm of the respiratory rhythm. It helps, for example, if there is any cardiorespiratory symptoms, it helps in the parasympathetic responses. It also helps in the bronchial muscle cells. It also helps in exercise in high altitude. Basically, for example, if we're exercising, if we're in high altitude, usually the oxygen levels quite decrease. So those things actually, like the VRG is aware that, for example, something wrong is happening, oxygen level is beginning to decrease in the body. So please try to compensate and let's increase or let's hyperventilate to try as much as possible to equalize or normalize the oxygen level in the body. And also we have the pneumotaxic center. It basically inhibits or switch off the inspiration, and those three things basically collaborate all the way together so that we have normal breathing. We don't want to have very high oxygen levels in the body. We don't want to have very high or very low carbon dioxide levels in the body. No, we want to have homeostasis just to maintain every single thing in the body. Now to talk more about the VRG or the ventral respiratory group, it's basically, which is located all the way in here. It basically has three nucleuses. We have number one, the rostral nucleus retrofacialis. We have the second is the caudal nucleus retroambiguous, and the third thing is the nucleus paraambiguous. Basically, this ambiguous thing is also something that's available in the brainstem. So, like as they say, اسم على مسمى, it's like those names are basically taken from something that's available in the brainstem. To be more specific, in the medulla. Because we won't go like into it, but I'm just telling you for the sake of the knowledge. And actually, you can, like, in regard to the names, we have a couple of names. Or generally, we have some names that are quite difficult. But if you made a fancy name out of it, and if you just interlink the names together, like the medical names, we have actually a couple of medical names in the body that are actually very interconnected to one another, and just to memorize it in an easier way. So basically, in regard to the ventral respiratory group, as we said, we have three nucleuses. the rostral, the caudal, and the nucleus periambiguous. Those two things, as we said, are also considered part of the function of the VRG, as what we discussed in here. Now, as we said, the VRG basically doesn't only help in inspiration, but in both inspiration as well as the expiration. Now, in regard to this VRG, it also helps in the cardio, as we said, the VRG or the brainstem in general. To be more specific, the medulla oblongata and the pons help in the cardiorespiratory functioning or coupling, so that we, as much as possible, try to maintain a normal oxygen and carbon dioxide level in the body. And if there's anything abnormal, or if the diaphragmatic muscle and the external intercostal muscle aren't really regulating in their normal function for us to take for the lung to inspire and expire in a normal way, that means we're going to be using the accessory muscles for the expiratory and inspiratory, and this also will be aided by the function of the VRG or by the ventral respiratory group. Basically, also the VRG helps in regulating the sympathetic pathway. How does this happen? For example, if somehow somebody had heart failure, had hypertension, anemia, or was exercising, or like for whatever reason, the oxygen levels is unstable in the body, that means the VRG help in stimulating this sympathetic pathway, for example, to increase the heart rate, to increase the breathing, or to slow the heart rate, to slow the breathing, so that it can compensate the abnormality or the pathology that's happening in the body. Now, in regard to the DRG, or the dorsal respiratory group, as we said, it's available in the NTS, which is the nucleus tractus solitarius. Nucleus tractus solitarius has this DRG, and it also has other cranial nerves, and it's available in the medulla oblongata. So basically, this NTS has a sensory input of the vagus nerve. Vagus nerve is basically cranial nerve number 10. It also has the glossopharyngeal nerve, which is cranial nerve number 9. It's the tongue nerve. It's both the sensory part of the posterior sensory part of the tongue is the glossopharyngeal nerve, and it helps in the peripheral chemoreceptor, baroreceptor, and it also has the mechanoreceptor. So this is in regards to the DRG or the dorsal respiratory group. Now, in regard to the last thing, which is the pneumothoracic center, it's basically available, as we said, P always stands with P. It's available in the pons or in the upper pons, and this pneumothoracic center significantly helps us to either increase the rate of breathing or decrease the rate of breathing. If it increases the rate of breathing, it can actually reach 30 to 40 breaths per minute. If it decreases, or if the signals was poor or weak to the pneumothoracic center, it would decrease the breathing to 3 to 4 breaths per minute. I just want to make sure everything is clear in regard to this concept so that we move on. If it's clear, just kindly type on the chat. Okay, that's perfect. Okay, moving on. Okay, so now in regards to the pulmonary reflexes, we have a couple of reflexes. We have number 1, the slow adapting stretch. If we have the slow, that means we have the rapid or the fast pulmonary stretch, and also we have other types. Let's move one by one. Now, in regard to this pulmonary reflex, pulmonary is lungs. Reflex, that means a reflex. For example, for every action, there's a reaction. This is like simply the meaning of the reflex. Now, another name for slowly adapting stretch receptor is basically the hearing blower reflex. Now, this thing actually helps us in regulating the breathing. How it helps in regulating the breathing? It prevents any extra inspiration or any extra expiration. So we want normal breathing, inspiration, expiration. We don't want to over or extra inspire, or vice versa, to over or extra expire. So this thing basically, where are those slow adapting receptors available? They are available in the muscles. Which muscle? The smooth muscle. Smooth muscle of what? Of the airway. Since we're talking about the lungs, it's going to be available in the airway, and they'll be innervated by myelin. Some of the nerves are going to be myelinated. Some of them are going to be demyelinated or unmyelinated or non-myelinated. But this is not really like our focus, as long as we know that those slowly adapting receptors are basically available in the lungs, in the smooth muscle of the lung. Now, when are they going to be activated, and what's their function? Now, in regard, as we said, to the function of the slowly adapting stretch receptors, they prevent extra inspiration and extra expiration, and they will terminate. Once we have over inspiration, it will be terminated, and we want to have normal inspiration. Once we have over expiration, it will be terminated, because we don't want to have over expiration. We should have always residual volume in the lungs, as we have residual volume, for example, in the heart. Once the heart pumps, we should have residual volume. We should also have residual volume in the lungs. Now, what's the meaning of residual volume? volume is the volume itself. Residual is the remaining. Remember, residual starts with R, remaining like RR, okay? So residual volume is the remaining volume of oxygen that is left, okay? So this is the function of the slowly adapting receptors, that we don't want to have extra inspiration or extra expiration. When are they going to be activated? Once we have any distension, or once the individual inspire a lot, so we will have a very big inflated lung. That means انه لا خلاص the slowly adapting receptor will say that please we don't want to over inspire. يلا let's مثلا stop the inspiration at this phase. This who's going to stop this thing is basically the slowly adapting receptors. And then if, for example, we have breath holding, we don't want to breath hold the lung for like a couple of minutes. No, we want exchange to happen, inspiration and expiration. So this is going to be stimulated by what? By the slowly adapting stress receptors. And if we can have deflated lung, that means the lung is not inflated, the lung is not inspired or big. Once we have deflated lung, معناها we have expiration. We don't want like over expiration. We don't want this to have. As we said, we should have some of the residual volume, or in other words, the FRC, which is the functional residual capacity. We should have some of the residual oxygen to be left in the alveoli or in the lung. Now, this is the first, we discussed more about the first pulmonary reflex, which is the slowly adapting stretch receptor, or in other words, the Hearing-Brewer reflex. Okay, perfect. Now, as we said, we're going to review everything we said in regard to this slowly adapting receptor. It's basically available in the smooth muscle of the airway, and it's myelinated. It has a vagal nerve, and it's basically myelinated, and it helps in maintaining the inflation and the deflation of the lung. We don't want the lung to be over inflated or deflated. And also, in regard to this slowly adapting pulmonary stress receptor, or the Hearing-Brewer reflex, it helps in both terminating the inspiration as well as expiration if it's been going to pathological or abnormal way. تمام? Is it clear? Clear? تمام, perfect. Now, in regard to this thing, we're going to discuss more about it. As we said, in regards to the slow adapting receptor, for example, let's say now a person inspires. So, alhamdulillah, we have inspiration. Once we have inspiration, normally the lung is going to distend, or it's going to inflate. Means this is a normal lung. Will it keep on inflating like a balloon till it bursts? No, it should suddenly stop. So this stopping thing, or this thing, is regulated by the slowly adapting receptors. So this thing is a stop. So let's have a scenario: a person is inspiring, and then the inspiration won't continue to the infinity. It should stop. So once we have the normal lung distension that's required for having the exchange and for having everything normally, this inspiration should terminate. So that we want to have the process of expiration. So what will terminate this inspiration for us is basically the slowly adapting receptor, or the Hearing-Brewer reflex. Okay, so this basically diagram just explains the same concept that we did, and it's this is the lung stretch reflex. The lung stretch once we have inspiration and expiration. Tamam. Now we are done with the first pulmonary reflex. Moving into the second pulmonary reflex, it's called rapidly adapting stretch receptors. From the word itself, it says rapidly. That means we want to have it very quickly happening. When will this receptor basically work very quickly? Once we have something irritant. That means something the lung, for example, if there's an irritant, or if there's a foreign body into the lung, or there is, for example, if somebody is shocked for whatever, if somebody, for example, is eating and then talking at the same time, so if they're shocked or whatever, we should have a rapid response, because this rapid response is really very important. We don't want to have something slowly won't really help. We want to have something rapid so that the body will compensate and remove this foreign material, remove this whatever particle, remove whatever the irritant is, so that we can breathe normally. This thing will happen by something called rapidly adapting stretch receptors. It has another name, which is called irritant receptor. Why is it irritant receptor? Because if there's an irritant, what's an irritant? Irritant is basically like a foreign body, anything that's irritating the lung pathway or the lung passage, like the trachea, the larynx, and everything. In the lung, we want it to be all the way like removed or expelled out of the lung pathway or lung way, or out of the body in general. Tamam. So where is this basically available? It's basically available in the epithelium. Epithelium of what? Since we're talking about the lungs, of the airway epithelium. It has a basically myelinated vagal nerve. So both nerves for the rapidly and the slowly receptors, they are myelinated. Now, when will this basically be active and what's the function of it? As we said, in regards to the rapidly adapting stretch receptors, it should be acting very rapidly. When will it act very rapidly? If, for example, we have any of the abnormal particles, foreign body, so how will we basically, the first mechanism of us removing it, this foreign material or foreign body, is by coughing. So we have number one, the cough reflex. Once you have cough reflex, this is basically stimulated by the rapidly adapting stretch receptor. Also, it also helps the rapidly adapting stretch receptors or the irritant receptor also help in the gasp and bronchoconstriction. If we have very high activity, we can have the bronchoconstriction, and this will be basically aided by the rapidly adapting stretch receptors. Now, in regard to the activation, when will this irritant receptor be activated? If, for example, we have any of the irritants, as we said, it will definitely be working عشان to immediately send the abnormal particle or the foreign body away from the body or away from the lung. And if we have very high lung distension, it's very much inspired. That means and suddenly it's stuck. We want it to rapidly act and help in aiding of the expiration, and this will be aided by the rapidly adapting stretch receptors or the irritant receptor. Now we're going to review what we said. As we said, in regard to this pulmonary receptor, which is called rapidly adapting stretch receptor, it basically helps in removing the irritant away. Because of that, as they say, it's called irritant receptor. And it's basically, it has a very high activity, especially if there's a cause of gasp or bronchoconstriction, and it helps in the cough reflex. For example, for any patient who has lung transplant, like so they won't really have a very strong response because in regard to the rapidly adapting stretch reflex or stretch receptor. Why? Because they won't really have this vagal connection with the CNS, and this will actually unfortunately help in the accumulation of irritants, of abnormal materials into the lung, which might definitely cause infection and inflammation of the lung. So normally any individual who has a normal physiological lung, they will have this vagal connection to the CNS, and they will be basically having the rapidly adapting stretch receptor or the irritant receptor, compared to an individual who has lung transplant. They won't have this connection, which will aid in the accumulation or any irritant actually material can easily penetrate like their airway, and by time they can actually have infection, recurrent infection and inflammation. Okay. Okay, so basically, usually they can cough, but their cough reflex isn't as strong as an individual with a normal untransplanted lung. Okay, so we have here, I just drew this diagram. I'm actually quite hopefully good in drawing. So we have, this is the lung, and this is the lung. This is a normal lung, which is basically having a vagal connection connected to the CNS, and everything is normal. So once we have a bad, this is basically bad. Once we have this is basically a foreign body, and I just wrote bad. So once we have this foreign body that's invaded into the lungs, it's by cough reflex, by any other reflex, we're gonna all the way remove it away from the body or away from the lungs, compared to an individual who has a transplanted lung. They won't really have a very good reflex in regard to this foreign material or foreign body. So by time it's going to accumulate into their lung, causing infection and inflammation. Okay, now moving into our third type, which is basically C fiber or J receptor. J is basically juxta, and you'll hear juxta not only here, but also juxta in the kidney. We have also something juxta. So okay, so we have the C fiber and the J receptor, and also C fiber is one of the pain fibers, or one of the pain, yeah. So you'll hear it in a couple of places just to interconnect the information together. So basically, in like focusing on this part, we have C fiber and J receptor. They are talking into the lungs. To be more specific, they are basically available all the way near the capillaries, and they are innervated by non-myelinated. So basically, the first and the second type of pulmonary reflex, we said they are innervated by myelinated or by non-myelinated. For the C fiber and J fiber, it's non-myelinated. What about the first two types? Just tell me in the chat, is it myelinated or non-myelinated? Yes, salam. Excellent. It's basically mumtaz. All of you are concentrating, mashallah. Exactly. So in regard to the C fiber, J receptor is basically non-myelinated vagal fiber, and they are available near the capillaries. Okay, that's perfect, mashallah. Excellent. So when will they be activated and what are the function of this C fiber and the J receptor? Okay, so basically here is just say that J is juxtacapillary there because they are near the capillaries. So like it's an mashallah. So they'll be activated if we have, for example, any increase in the interstitial fluid, for example, increase in the interstitial fluid of the lung, but not in the body in general, in the lung. If, for example, we have pulmonary embolism, increase in the interstitial fluid, if we have congestion, pulmonary edema, this C5 J receptor will immediately be activated and try as much as possible to compensate not having as much as possible in the increase in the interstitial fluid, so that we want to prevent any pathology to the lung, like pulmonary congestion, like pulmonary edema. Now, if, for example, it's going to also be activated, the J receptor and C fiber, if we have PE or pulmonary embolism. Let's talk more about the pulmonary embolism so that you know, like, how this PE or the pulmonary embolism can actually, from where, like, it comes. Now, let's say, for example, a patient who had DVT. DVT is basically deep vein thrombosis. They had a thrombus in the for example in the lung, like in the legs. Deep vein thrombosis that happens in the leg. This thrombus, some part of this thrombus can actually just move away from the leg, مثلا, from having deep vein thrombosis all the way to any part in the body. The most common thing that of the DVT is basically having PE, which is pulmonary embolism, and this is actually like a exam question. Like DVT and PE are very much interconnected to one another. So this DVT or deep vein thrombosis. From this deep vein thrombosis, this thrombus, if a part of the thrombus is just, for example, the thrombus is circle in shape, مثلا, let's say part of it is being removed from this thrombus, this circulating bad thing, which is the emboli, can actually most common place for DVT to be reoccurring, like the thrombus or the DVT to be reoccurring and becoming embolism, is basically in the lungs. Because of that, we have the pulmonary embolism. So this is like the most common place where the embolus of the lung can actually come from. We have many other places, but the most common thing is like DVT and PE. Deep vein thrombosis, pulmonary embolism. Just to know that, like, for you to understand more about the pulmonary embolism. Now, this pulmonary embolism, once we have it, it's going to happen in the lung. So we have an emboli, which we have something that's obstructing the blood to be flowing normally. That means we will have problem in the exchange of the oxygen and carbon dioxide. The person will have, maybe by time the person is going to have hypercapnia, maybe hypoxia is going to also happen. We have less oxygen levels in the blood, and مثلا the body try as much as possible to compensate by hyperventilating, so that we try as much as possible to increase the oxygen in the lung, which is going to be transferred all the way to the body, increasing the oxygen. مثلا we can also have tachycardia, tachypnea. Tachypnea is increased in the it's like hyperventilation, the increase in breathing. This is tachypnea. Maybe you can have tachycardia, the heart start pumping fast. So like the body have its own compensatory mechanism, so that to try as much as possible not to have this embolus, or not to have this, for example, increase in the interstitial fluid to be affecting the normal oxygen levels in the blood, okay, and to maintain a normal homeostasis. This is like the main objective of the lecture is to maintain normal, hopefully normal, or almost very near to normal oxygen levels in the body. Okay, now in regards to the C fiber and J receptor function, they basically help in the rapid shallow breathing. What does shallow mean? Shallow means not deep. So we want to have rapid, not deep breathing like this. So this rapid, not deep breathing is basically aided by the C fiber or the J receptor, number one. It also helps in the bronchial constriction. The bronchi is going to all the way be constricted, and it helps in the depression of the cardiovascular system. Okay, so as we said, we're gonna just review everything. The C fiber and the J or the juxtacapillary, the J receptor are gonna basically help in rapid shallow breathing and help in the bronchoconstriction as well as the cardiovascular depression. If there's, for example, as we said, pulmonary embolism, we have an emboli that's available in the lung, in the blood vessels of the lung. That means that we will have a normal compensatory mechanism happening by the body, so that we want to, as much as possible, try to compensate this normal oxygen levels in the blood by, for example, having hyperventilation, so that we have hopefully normal oxygen level in the blood. Or tachypnea is basically tachy is fast, pnea is the lung, so having very fast lung breathing, or in other words, hyperventilation. Just don't confuse tachypnea with tachycardia. Tachy in general means fast. Pnea is lung, and cardia is heart. So that one is tachycardia, means very fast heart beating. And tachypnea is very fast breathing, or in other words, like hyperventilating. Okay? Okay. Now talking about the fourth type, which is basically the muscle spindle. Muscle spindles, basically we're talking about the muscle spindle, the spindles of the muscle itself. Okay, so we have, in regard to muscle spindle, we have a couple of spindle fibers in it. We're going to focus more about the gamma spindle. This basically gamma spindle help in inhalation or inspiring and expiring. How? It basically it stretches. For example, once we have inspiration, it stretches as much as possible. Same goes to the expiration, because it tries as much as possible to prevent for example, having abnormal inspiration and expiration. How does that happen? Basically, where are they located? In regard to gamma spindle, they're available in the intercostal muscles and the diaphragm. And this is the normal location of it, because we want to inspire and expire. So it should be available in the lungs or in the airway. And as we said, gamma spindle, from the word itself, spindles are basically available in the muscle. So they are available in the intercostal muscle and diaphragmatic muscle, okay? And they definitely have a very quick response if there's an increase in resistance, and it helps in the compliance. As I said, we have a couple of muscle spindle, we have the alpha, the gamma, and we have many other things. We're going to focus more on the gamma, and this gamma basically is basically help us very much in the activity to produce the appropriate shortening of the inspiratory muscles. And as we said, it definitely helps in aiding the inspiration and expiration in a normal way, to prevent any abnormality or any over inflation of the lung. Now, as we said, we have many pathology of the lungs. In regard to this lecture, it just says the restrictive pulmonary disease and the obstructive pulmonary disease. As we said, a very easy mnemonic to know the difference between them. Restrictive is basically like a model, lung. So it's thin. It's mashallah. It's like it's a thin shaped lung. Compared to the obstructive, obstructive is so it's very inflated lung. Now, what's the difference between them? In regard to the restrictive, can you imagine if the lung is very thin? So that means once the person inhale, that means they won't really have the complete inhalation for the lung to be all the way inflated. That means they will just inhale and then suddenly exhale, because the lung can't expand. This is the problem in the restrictive lung disease. Because of that, I told you from the beginning, if you know how the restrictive lung disease will look like for example, the lung is going to look like more into like a thin shape. That means you know the pathology is that it can't expand till the end. Okay, same goes to the obstructive. It's very much inflated. That means that the person is gonna have a lot of oxygen intake compared in the obstructive lung disease compared to the restrictive lung disease. Tamam. So this thing also actually refers that the gamma spindle isn't working into its ultimate function in the pathological lung diseases like the restrictive and the obstructive lung disease. Okay, so I want to draw for you how the restrictive lungs like. So if this is, for example, let's say this is the lung, this is how the restrictive lung disease looks like. Okay, just never mind the problem. It's very thin. Compared to the obstructive lung disease, the lung will be very much inflated. It's going to be really so big. So just remember, this is the big lung and this is the restrictive lung disease. So this small one is the restrictive. It's like more into the vertical manner, and it's like vertical. Compared to the obstructive, it's more into the horizontal manner, and it's very much inflated. Okay, so inshallah it's clear. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so what is this? Yeah, tell me, what is this? حتى لو by guesses. Yeah, salam. Excellent. Exactly. This is the brainstem. To be more specific, is it the midbrain, pons, or medulla? What's the most important thing in the cardiorespiratory? The most thing involved, is it the yeah, salam. Exactly. MashaAllah. مبدعين. Exactly. It's the medulla oblongata. This is basically the medulla oblongata. And exactly. So basically this, we have a brainstem. As we said, we have the midbrain, pons, and medulla, or medulla oblongata. This thing is the medulla oblongata. Now, what are those things, the spikes that are coming out of this medulla oblongata? It's basically the cranial nerves. we said we have 12 cranial nerves. Some cranial nerves go out from the midbrain, some goes from the pons, and some goes from the medulla. Okay, so those are some of the cranial nerves that goes from the medulla. Just to know, like those spiky things, what are they? They are basically the cranial nerves. Will we focus them? Will we focus on the cranial nerves in this section? Not at all. We just want to focus on those three circular things, which are the rostral area, the intermediate area, and the caudal area. What are those? Basically, those are the chemosensitive regions that are available in the medulla oblongata that also helps in breathing. Now we have, okay, so basically those are the three main things. Now let's talk more about them. What are those things? Basically, those three things are available, as we said, in the medulla oblongata. Anything that's available in the middle. See, because of that, I told you from the beginning that the brainstem, to be more specific, medulla oblongata followed by the pons in general, are very important in regulating the cardiorespiratory breathing. Why? Because we have a lot of things. We have chemoreceptors in there. We have like many things that helps in the cardiorespiratory function. Now, in regard to those three things, they are basically chemoreceptors. Will we call them as central or will we call them as peripheral chemoreceptors? What do you guys think? They are available in the brainstem, and they are available in the central nervous system, not in the periphery. So what do we call them? Exactly, we call them central, exactly. So they are called as the central chemoreceptor. But if we have central chemoreceptor, if you have central, that means you also have peripheral. So basically CCR is central chemoreceptor. Since we have, as we said, CCR, we have the peripheral chemoreceptor, we have the PCR. Okay, so what is this? What's the function basically of this central chemoreceptor? This central chemoreceptor, basically, as we said, it has three main parts, which are the caudal. Caudal means like below, to the down. Okay, so we have cranial. The opposite of cranial is caudal. Like cranial, like the cranium of the head is above. Opposite to cranium is caudal, it's down. So we can see, like, compared to those three circular things, which are basically the chemoreceptors, the above one is the rostral, the below one, the least one amongst those three, or the below one is the caudal, because like it's the lowest amongst all of them. So like by understanding the meaning of the words, even if you forgot the word itself, يعني if you understood the meaning, inshallah, you have a very high probability of remembering the word itself. تمام. So caudal means below, and it's the caudal, this one is the least one amongst those three chemoreceptors. Okay, so in regard to the CCR, or the central chemoreceptors, as I said, we have three. We have the rostral, we have the intermediate, and we have the caudal receptors. And they, as we said, as you guys kindly said, they are basically available in the brainstem, to be more specific, in the medulla or the medulla oblongata. Okay, so now these things, they are basically located in the ventrolateral. Ventro is the ventral, so it's located in the anterior lateral side of the medulla, and they are basically available in the medulla raphe. Now, what's this medulla raphe? As we can see, this medulla raphe, for example, this is the medulla oblongata, as we said. If I just took a cross section of this medulla, let's say cross section مثلا from here, anywhere. In this case, they took a cross section from here, as we can see this line. We took a cross section from here, and this middle thing is basically the medulla raphe. تمام. So basically, they are available. Those structures are available, or the chemosensitive receptors in general are available in the ventrolateral surface of the medulla oblongata. تمام. Now, what's basically like the importance of these chemoreceptors? As we said, any receptor in general, chemoreceptor, baroreceptor, mechanoreceptor, they are receptors. They help in the negative feedback. They all help in aiding the homeostasis of the body as much as they can, so that they return the body to a normal physiological function. We don't want any pathological function. Anything pathology, the body compensates to have a normal physiological function. Now, basically, they are very important, and they are this chemoreceptor, or the CCR, are stimulated by the H plus or by acid. And because once the carbon dioxide increases, the CO2 increases, usually H plus increase. So once CO2 increase, H plus increase, that means the body is going more to acidic form. Once the oxygen increase, we're gonna go more into the alkalosis. So, which is actually normal. So basically, we don't want our body to go into acidemia. Acid is acid, emia is blood. So we don't want the blood to be acidemia more than it being the alkalemia. Tamam. So H plus is basically acidic. So once CO2 increases, H plus increases, the body is gonna go to acidemia or acidosis, and we don't want this thing to happen. We want the alkalosis to happen, the OH to increase, the oxygen to increase. So once oxygen increase, OH increase, and the body is going to move more into the alkalosis. Okay, so once we have H increase in the body, we don't want this thing to happen, and the body try as much as possible to decrease it by decreasing the CO2 and increasing the oxygen. Okay, so basically if we have any increase in the partial pressure of the carbon dioxide, that means we're gonna have, as we said, decreased pH. That means the pH is gonna be low. We will have more into the acidosis is gonna happen, and this will definitely affect the CSF. Now, in regard to the CSF is basically cerebrospinal fluid. Now, the fluid that's available in the brain and in the spinal cord, it's called the CSF. Why is it important? We have a lot of functions on it. It helps in Cushing, it helps in decreasing the weight of the brain, and we have many more functions of the CSF. But this is the meaning of the CSF. It's basically cerebrospinal fluid. From the word itself, cerebro, it's the cerebrum, spinal, it's the spinal cord, and it's basically a fluid, and it's available in the central nervous system, in the brain, and in the spinal cord, okay? So this CSF is more sensitive to the carbon dioxide than the H+. So for example, once the carbon dioxide decreases, the CSF will immediately be stimulated by having decreased H, and the CSF will be stimulated that we have less, if we have high of the CO2, the body will have more of the H+, which is more of the acid. CSF will be very much stimulated with, oh my gosh, the body is going into, for example, hypercapnia, the body is going to have hypoxia. So please, let's try as much as possible to compensate by hyperventilating, okay? So this CSF and the pH and the CO2 will definitely be affecting the VT and the FR, which are basically the tidal volume and the functional residual volume. And yeah, so it just says in here that if we have any single defect in the H+ or in the acid in the body, we will definitely be having sleep apnea. Sleep apnea, should be if basically we have the word before any word, it means no. For example, apnea, we have many other words, okay? So apnea is breathing, apnea is no breathing. So somebody is gonna sleep and they have apnea, it means no breathing. We can have panic disorder, epilepsy, and many more examples, SIDS, which is the sudden infant death syndrome. All of this is gonna happen if you have any single defect in the sensitivity of feeling the H+ ions, or of feeling that we have, if there's any defect in the H+ ions or defect in the carbon dioxide in the body. There's nothing that senses that we have, for example, accumulation of CO2, accumulation of H+. That means the body won't really take the normal compensatory mechanism by hyperventilating and everything else, which, as we said from the beginning of the lecture, will unfortunately can cause the death of the individual. So because of that, it's really very important to have the normal physiological compensatory functions. Okay, so somebody requested to repeat the CSF part. Okay, I'm gonna repeat it now. I'll just repeat it, inshallah, in a way that's gonna be clearer. Now we said in regard to the CCR, it's basically the central chemoreceptor. We said we have three: rostral, intermediate, and caudal. These chemoreceptors in general help in regulating normal cardiorespiratory breathing, so that we don't want to have hyperventilation or hypoventilation. We just care about having normal oxygen levels. This is number one. Now, how will this normal thing happen? We should have some physiology in the body. How will this, let's say somebody suddenly have increase in the partial pressure of carbon dioxide in the body. Now, if we have increase in this CO2, it's something abnormal. We don't want increase. We don't want to have hypercapnia. We want to have normal physiological function of the body. Right? Now, once we have this increase in the CO2 will accumulate in the body. Once the CO2 accumulates, we will have high of the H+ or high of the H ions, of the hydrogen ions. Now, if this hydrogen ion is acidic, right? So we don't want the body to be accumulated by CO2, and then we want to have H+. We don't want to have H+ ions. We don't want to have hydrogen ions. We want to have normal physiology. We don't want the body to be acidic. So once this CO2 increases, once this H+ increase or the pH decreases, that means it's more too acidic, this will be definitely sensed by the CSF or by the cerebrospinal fluid, which is available in the central nervous system. So once the CSF have the sense that we have very high carbon dioxide or very high H+ or hydrogen ions, it immediately stimulates us to hyperventilate, to breathe more, so that we want to maintain normal physiological body function. We will have the tidal volume, it's going to increase. The functional residual volume, we will have VT and VF are basically tidal volume. Tidal volume is it's basically have like a calculation, a graph for it, but it's the oxygen that's basically in our body. The functional residual volume is as we said, residual is remaining, the remaining oxygen particles in the oxygen particles or any other particles in general, but mainly the oxygen particles that are left in the lung. So this basically just says that the CSF is very sensitive to any changes that happens, and it's very good for the CSF to be sensitive, for example, to any changes like having very high CO2, which will simulate having low pH. In other words, we have high H plus, because low pH is acidic. That means we have high H plus. Once the CSF senses this thing, it will immediately say to the body that please, let's increase the ventilation of this individual, so that we try as much as possible to get rid of the carbon dioxide and to have a hopefully normal amount of oxygen in the body. Okay, and if we have if we continuously مثلا have defect مثلا the CSF isn't having this sense إنه there is مثلا high of CO2 or high of the H plus, and we have insensitivity for مثلا whatsoever reason, we have a pathology that we have insensitivity to the abnormal levels of CO2 or of H plus in the body. What will happen? Any pathology can happen. So if we have insensitivity that there is something abnormal in the body, like for example having high CO2, having high H, having low pH, the body is becoming acidic, and then we have no any response, no any compensatory mechanism to this thing, that means the defect is gonna happen. Any defect, you name it, any illness, sleep apnea, the person can sleep without breathing. صح ولا لا? Panic disorder is gonna happen. Very high levels of CO2 are available. There is no any compensatory mechanism to hyperventilate, to remove this CO2 and take in or inhale the oxygen. Epilepsy can happen. Migraine is basically one of the type of the headaches. It's called migraine. SIDS is gonna happen. So infant death syndrome can happen. Basically you just name the list. You can name whatever pathology you want. If we have abnormal compensatory or insensitivity to the abnormal levels of carbon dioxide or of H plus or hydrogen ion or low pH having acidemia in the body. Inshallah, it's clearer. Epilepsy is like basically epilepsy is a type of a seizure. So seizure is like abnormal. Basically, there's an abnormal brain activity, tamam, that happens with abnormal signals and everything. So one of the type of the seizures is epilepsy, tamam. If this seizure continuously happen once, twice, thrice onwards, then this person is gonna have epilepsy. يعني عرفت كيف? So you're most welcome. Okay, perfect. And migraine is one of the type of the headaches. epilepsy in Arabic is basically تشنج. الواحد بيكون عنده تشنجات. We can also say صرع. Okay, so like it's a abnormal jerky movement. It can present in different ways, either jerky movement, like physically, either مثلا eye movement, like very high speed مثلا blinking of the eye. It can even it can present as also voice changes or voice repetition. So and it's basically just abnormal electrical activity of the brain, and it mostly happens in a lobe in the brain called temporal lobe. But in general, just like what's the meaning of epilepsy. So this also like everything in regard to these things happens by a trigger of high carbon dioxide without normal compensatory mechanisms. Those things can happen because of high CO2 or because of anything else. But a CO2, like here it basically shows how CO2, if it increased without a normal compensation, how basically this like very severe diseases can actually happen. Okay, moving on. So now we're done with the central chemoreceptor. Since we have, as we said, central, we should have peripheral. So now we're going to talk about the peripheral chemoreceptor. It's way simpler, inshallah. So we have, number one, the aortic body. Now we have, let's just get oriented to this picture. This is our heart. And then this is the aorta, okay? So the aorta has aortic body. يعني اسم على مسمى. Aortic body is available in the aorta. So we have in here aortic body, we have in here aortic body, and we have also here the carotid body. Why is it called carotid body? Because it's basically available in the carotid artery. Fine. Now we have this is carotid body, this is a carotid body. We have 1 and 2 aortic bodies. So what's the benefit of those bodies, سواء كان aortic أو carotid body? Basically, those are they actually sense like a peripheral, like a chemoreceptor. Since we have central, they regulate basically all of them help in the regulation of the breathing. سواء كان peripheral سواء كان central. بس we like usually قسم سبحانه وتعالى made for us not only central chemoreceptor but also peripheral عشان to try as much as possible to compensate our body in a fast, rapid way and in a very precise way. Okay, so in regard to those bodies, they have almost the exact function um as the central chemoreceptor. Now we have in here they said vagus nerve. And we have here the glossopharyngeal nerve. So what is this vagus nerve? What's this glossopharyngeal nerve? Here we have X. X is basically number 10. You know, like they sometimes we write like X, XV, and blah, blah, blah. Those things are basically like numerical numbers that aren't in English differently. So we have N. V is basically nerve or cranial nerve number 10. It's vagus nerve. And this one V, it's basically or IV, sorry, IX, it's basically cranial nerve number 9. Okay, so this is 9 and this is 10. N is cranial nerve. So in other words, glossopharyngeal nerve is cranial nerve number 9, vagus nerve is cranial nerve number 10. This is never ever just like don't really focus about cranial nerve number 9 and 10 like in this lecture. It's none of the it has none of the significance in this lecture. We just want to care more about the concept of chemoreceptors, which are of the aortic body and of the carotid body. I'm just mentioning this thing عشان for you to just get oriented about like what's this thing, okay? تمام. So in regard to the chemoreceptors, as we said, those things are the peripheral chemoreceptor. What's the function of it? It almost has the same function of the central chemoreceptor. If there is, for example, hypoxia, if we have hypercapnia, if we have any abnormality in the body, high of the CO2 مثلا, high of the H plus or hydrogen ions, suddenly the oxygen is being decreasing in the body, those chemoreceptors will definitely just compensate as much as it can so that it returns the body to the normal physiological function by hyperventilating, maybe even by increasing the heart rate, by having tachycardia. Maybe مثلا it's gonna also vasoconstrict the vessels so that the body so that يعني we will have a low surface area so that the blood can move as much as possible or the oxygen in the blood can move as much as possible to like vital organs like the heart, like the lungs, the liver, the kidney, and the brain. Okay, so this is the main function of the peripheral chemoreceptor. It basically help in regulating any abnormality that happens in the body by having like a compensatory mechanism, as we said, tachycardia, tachypnea, hyperventilation, vasoconstriction of the blood vessels. تمام. It can, and basically vasoconstriction of the blood vessels help in raising the blood pressure, which in this case is good so that we want to have high, as I said, high amount of oxygen reaching to the vital organs. Okay, so what else would I say? Okay, so now in regard to the, if for example, for whatsoever reason, we have a decrease in the arterial partial pressure of the oxygen, that means the carotid, the aortic body, the carotid body is gonna sense that, okay, there is something wrong, we have decreased partial pressure or decreased oxygen in the blood. So we might have, if there is not any compensatory mechanism, we might have hypoxia, we might have hypercapnia, we will have decreased pH, which is going to have very high number of the H plus. So please, let's have a very fast compensatory mechanism because we want to compensate this abnormal thing which is happening by, يلا you tell me the mechanisms. What we're going to have? Hyperventilation, what else? Tachycardia, ممتاز, what else? Tachypnea, excellent. Exactly. So we have many compensatory mechanisms so that the body will try as much as possible to compensate this abnormal stimulus or abnormal threat that's actually happening to the body. Okay. So here it just says that the threshold of the oxygen for activation is 80 millimeter mercury. And we have over here some of the receptors respond to the carbon dioxide and the pH, so that if there's any abnormality in them, it will definitely sense it and try as much as possible to compensate, so that we have normal levels of oxygen, normal levels of carbon dioxide, normal levels of the not to have acidosis, okay? And if we have any elevation in the partial pressure of the carbon dioxide above the normal level, which is above 40, we will have decrease in the pH and we will have acidemia, okay? Now, in regards to the pH, okay, so we have a question. Okay, we're gonna discuss more about it, don't worry. Okay, so now in regards to the pH, as we have a pH, let's assume that this is basically a pH scale, tamam, and the normal pH is 7, like the median range of a normal pH is basically 7.4. Normally, the normal pH is between 7.35 to 7.45. They said, okay, 7.35 to 7.45, it's like being 7.4, okay? So this is a normal pH. If the pH decreases, or in other words, is below 7.5, that means we're going to very high H plus ions or very high acidosis. And if the pH increases, which is in other words above 7.4, that means we are having alkalosis. Okay? So now, as we said, we talked about the central chemoreceptors and the peripheral chemoreceptors. A very quick review. Peripheral chemoreceptors mainly are available in the aortic body and in the carotid body, compared to the central chemoreceptor, as we said, which are available in the medulla oblongata. We have in 3 parts, which are the caudal, the intermediate, and the rostral area. They almost all have the same function, except for minor differences, and they all help in regulating the normal cardiorespiratory function, okay? And if there's any threat to the body, if there's any hypoxia, if there's any hypocapnia, all of them together, the central and the peripheral, will intercollaborate with one another so that it will try as much as possible to return the body to normal physiological breathing, okay? So this is mainly it in regard to the chemoreceptors. Same goes to the baroreceptor, same goes to the mechanoreceptor. All receptors in general almost have the exact function in regard to, like, almost have the exact vision in regard to having a normal cardiorespiratory function, normal breathing. And if there's any stimulus, any threat that disturbs or imbalance this normal thing, it basically tries as much as possible to compensate this thing by hyperventilating, by having raised blood pressure, by doing the vasoconstriction, having tachypnea, which is increase in the respiration or hyperventilation, having tachycardia, as much as possible, so that we will have as much as possible normal physiological function, just so we have as much as possible normal oxygen levels and normal oxygen and carbon dioxide levels in the body, so that the body can maintain normal functions without, for example, having any ischemia, which is low perfusion to whatever organ in the body in general, or a group of cells or tissue, and to prevent any of the abnormality in general. Okay, so this is the significance of the central and peripheral chemoreceptors. Now let's zoom in more into the peripheral chemoreceptor. So basically, we said we have the aortic bodies and the carotid body. Now, if we want to all the way zoom in into the carotid body chemoreceptor. Now let's assume this whole figure is basically the carotid body. Now, once we zoom in into it, we can see we have capillary, we have a nerve, we have cells, and in regard to those cells, we have 2 types of cells, which are basically number 1, type 1 cell, and the type 2 cell. I'll focus more into the type 1 cell. Another name for this type 1 cell is basically the glomus cell. So another name for this type 1 cell, which is available in the carotid body, is basically called as the glomus cell. Now, what's the function of basically this whole thing? They basically said we want to understand how this carotid body and how this in general peripheral chemoreceptors basically sense that we have, for example, low blood pressure, low oxygen, high carbon dioxide, or any other abnormal stimulus in the body. We want to really understand how this thing happens. Okay, we know that chemoreceptors will have a negative feedback and will, for example, compensate by having either vasoconstriction, vasodilation, tachypnea, bradypnea, or whatever thing. Okay, now they want to really understand what happens inside this thing. Okay, so let's review. We said this is a carotid body, and so this is a peripheral chemoreceptor. To be more specific, carotid body. We will focus more on type 1 cell, which is called as the glomus cell. Okay, now this cell is basically, it's have a very primary function in oxygen sensing. As we said, it's a chemoreceptor, so it's very sensitive to any abnormality that happens, and it's very sensitive to abnormal oxygen levels. Like, how this thing basically happens. Now, they said at the beginning it's quite unclear, but they had a hypothesis, which is basically this figure. Now, this circle is basically type 1 cell, and this is a nerve, which is actually this nerve, this carotid sinus nerve. So we will basically focus on this type 1 cell, and this nerve, which is in this picture, it's this circular thing, type 1 cell, and this nerve. Now they said how this thing happens. So they said, okay, why won't we assume the hypothesis of this thing, which just made some common sense at least, if we had low oxygen in the blood? Or in other words, if we have low oxygen, that means we have high carbon dioxide. If we have high carbon dioxide, that means the pH will be low. In other words, we have high of the H plus ions in the body, high of the hydrogen ions in the body. طيب, this makes sense. So this is the very first thing that happens. So how will this thing helps in having a negative feedback in the this peripheral chemoreceptor? They said, okay, once we have this low oxygen levels, the chemoreceptor will immediately be triggered. How? This low oxygen level in the blood will actually stimulate the K receptor by having outflux of the K all the way outside from the type 1 cell. So we said this circle is a type 1 cell, and this is a nerve. So once we have low oxygen, K will be all the way outside the cell, going outside the cell, or we have outflux of the K. Once we have this outflux of the K, it will significantly help in the depolarization. They said, how will we have this depolarization? By having influx of the calcium ions. Once we have this calcium ions influxed all the way inside this type 1 cell, the glomus cell, it will significantly help this neurotransmitter, which is called dopamine neurotransmitter, to be all the way synapsed with this nerve, and it will help in the action potential to happen. So how will this action potential help me in regulating? It will help, for example, number one, sending to the central nervous system that, okay, guys, we have a threat, we are under threat, we have low oxygen levels, please let's collaborate together and have our compensatory mechanisms so that we can compensate this low oxygen levels by hyperventilating, vasoconstricting, having tachypnea, plus, we have a lot of other things in general, so that we can, as much as possible, return the body to a normal oxygen level. They said, okay, Allah mumtaz, let's all the way work together and compensate this, like this thing together. Now I want to give you extra knowledge in general. Usually depolarization, most, if not all of the cases, happens by the calcium influx. If you guys remember in the action potential, how the action potential happens, basically from one nerve to another nerve, once we have the influx of calcium into the presynaptic nerve, once this calcium all the way enters, it helps in the release of the acetylcholine from the from inside the nerve, okay, to all the way the synaptic area. So because of that, if you can just intercorrelate like all the ideas together, it's gonna make way more sense in general, because a lot of things in the body, actually, if this thing happens in here, most probably it's gonna happen also in here. Like if you intercorrelate things together, it's gonna make, you're gonna remember it easily, and it's gonna make way more sense, okay? So because of that, in the action potential from one nerve to another, calcium influx is really very important to help in the depolarization and the action potential to happen. The same thing exactly happens in here. We should have the calcium influx so that the action potential can all the way move. Now, in regards, the only difference between the normal action potential to move from one nerve to another compared to this thing, which is in the chemoreceptor, the type 1 cell, to this nerve, is the neurotransmitters. Here, the neurotransmitter is basically a dopamine neurotransmitter. Compared to the nerves, we have the acetylcholine neurotransmitter. But in general, all of them have almost exactly the same function. A neurotransmitter is needed for action potential to be moving. So let's repeat everything. Once we have, this is a chemoreceptor. In other words, to be more specific, is a peripheral chemoreceptor. Okay? Okay. Now, once we have a stimulus that we have low oxygen, what's going to happen? Inside this peripheral chemoreceptor, in the type 1 cell, or the Glomus cell, we have outflux of the K. Once we have outflux of the K, it will help all the way influx of calcium. This calcium influx will help the neurotransmitters, the dopamine neurotransmitter, to be available in the synaptic area, so that we will have the action potential to be all the way happening, and hopefully normal compensatory mechanism to happen. Okay, so this is basically what happens in the peripheral chemoreceptor cell. And yes, so I just want to make sure, is this concept clear? Perfect. Perfect. Excellent, mashallah. Okay, so moving on to the next slide, let's have a very quick question. So what does high pH mean? Is it acidosis, alkalosis, both, or none of the above? What do you guys think? Exactly, high pH basically we have more of the alkalosis. Bravo, excellent. Okay, moving on to this diagram. So now we're done with the receptors, we're done with the chemoreceptors, we're done with all of those things. Now let's focus more on the ventilation response to hypoxia. Now we're going to talk more on more onto the diagrams and focus more onto the diagrams type. Now let's repeat just the concept. If we have we have a pH scale. If we have a low pH, that means we have high of the H plus or high of the hydrogen ions. That means we have most probably acidosis or acidemia. Vice versa happens if we have high pH. That means we have high of the bicarbonate ions. That means we have alkalosis in the body. تمام. The normal pH of the body is from 7.35 to 7.45. In average, it's 7.4. Okay, so this is just a very quick review of the previous concepts we took. Now, we're gonna, as we said, focus more onto the figures. Now, we have the first figure we'll talk about is the ventilation response to hypoxia. Hypoxia is basically hypo is low, oxia is oxygen. So we have low oxygen levels. But how this thing happens, we have this graph where it shows a y-axis and an x-axis. This x-axis represents the partial pressure of the carbon dioxide in millimeter mercury, and the y-axis presents the ventilation in liters per minute. Okay, now the more we go up in the y-axis, the higher the ventilation, as we can see 0, 20, 40, 60. The more we go from right to left, in the x-axis, the higher the oxygen. So that means the oxygen here 90 is more than 10. Okay, now this is the first thing we want to make it clear. Here we have a curve, not a linear, a curve, because the ventilation response to oxygen is never going to be linear. It will be basically a curve structure, That's clear. Now, in this curve structure, this represents the partial pressure of the carbon dioxide here and partial pressure of the carbon dioxide here. As we can see, this graph is high compared to this graph. Like this green thing is above this red thing. That means the red thing just shows how the partial pressure of the carbon dioxide is basically falling compared to the partial pressure of carbon dioxide here. It just shows that it's basically, in this point, 40 millimeters mercury. Now, let's just basically we're gonna review everything we took before. Yeah, let's review. Let's say that a person who is ventilating normally. That means they usually should have normal levels of oxygen in the body or in the blood. That means normally the oxygen, the more the oxygen is towards like the left side, like toward 90s, the better it is. The more it is more toward the right side, like toward 10, that means oxygen level will be more. And this makes way more sense as we can see. If we have low levels of oxygen, for example, let's say oxygen مثلا is 30, then we can see that the carbon dioxide curve is more going up. Like for example, here it's low, here it's going up, here it's going up. So if we have high oxygen, let's say مثلا 70 or 90, carbon dioxide is low. If we have low oxygen, 10, the carbon dioxide curve is going up. Is this first thing clear or not clear? Clear or not? Sure, I'll repeat. Okay, that's because it's quite confusing, so I prefer like clearing it before moving on. Okay, so we said we have an x-axis and a y-axis. This is the y-axis, and this is the x-axis. X-axis basically presents the partial pressure of oxygen. Y-axis presents the ventilation in liters per minute. Yalla, this is the first thing. It's clear. Tamam, tamam. Those two curves present the partial pressure of carbon dioxide. This is the first curve. The red one, and the second curve is the partial pressure of carbon dioxide, which is the green one. Here, the green one shows that the partial pressure of CO2 is 40 millimeters mercury. Perfect. Now we understood the graph, the y-axis, the x-axis, and the curve basically has the carbon dioxide. Now it's clear. Tamam? Tamam. Now, usually, we want to have normal levels of oxygen and carbon dioxide in the body. Generally speaking, like technically speaking, if oxygen is increased, that means carbon dioxide is most probably lower or lesser than the oxygen. If carbon dioxide is increased, like technically speaking, usually in the normal functioning, CO2 increased, that means the oxygen should be decreased. The exact same thing is shown in this graph. This graph basically shows like the x-axis is شوية يعني يمين يسار. It basically starts like the more you're gonna go to the right, the lesser the value of the oxygen. So moving from right side to the left side in the x-axis that shows the partial pressure of oxygen, the higher the oxygen. So that means if a person has oxygen of 90, it would definitely be better than oxygen of 10. Right ولا مش right عشان the oxygen is higher. تمام. So that means إنه if we have a partial pressure of oxygen of 90, okay, that means high oxygen in the body. We can see in this graph that the carbon dioxide is the least, like is very less compared to the rest of the curve. Okay, compared to the partial pressure of oxygen when it's 10, that means when it's very low, we can see, so low oxygen, we can see the carbon dioxide is high here and the carbon dioxide is high here. Is it clearer now? Okay, that's amazing. ممتاز. So basically this graph, the concept behind this graph is that if we have a constant carbon dioxide, which is, let's say, مثلا carbon dioxide is going to be constant 40, compared to a carbon dioxide which varies, like can goes up and can go down. For example, let's say if a person has a high carbon dioxide level and the body tries to compensate by hyperventilating and increase the oxygen levels, that means it's amazing. The body compensated, oxygen increases, carbon dioxide decreases. That's perfect. Okay, this is actually what this red curve represents compared to the green curve, which shows if, let's assume, if the carbon dioxide level is constant and it was 40, okay, that means if the body try to as much as possible to compensate this carbon dioxide level by hyperventilating, by having any other compensatory mechanism to increase the oxygen level, and the oxygen level is increased, but the carbon dioxide level isn't moving from this constant value, which is 40, that means the body needs more effort for it to try as much as possible to get rid of this 40. Clear or not clear? Or repeat? One, perfect, clear. Any questions so far? No questions? Perfect. Okay, so let's have a very quick review. We have the y-axis, ventilation, the x-axis is oxygen. Basically, it's as simple as once the oxygen decreases, usually the carbon dioxide increases, and vice versa. Once the carbon dioxide decreases, the oxygen should increase. تمام? Here it just shows if we have a constant value of carbon dioxide, which is 40, compared to this graph, which shows that the carbon dioxide can actually, like, it's lower. That means if we have a compensatory mechanism of hyperventilating, that means the carbon dioxide level can go down and the oxygen can go up, which is normally happening. If for whatsoever reason we have a constant level of CO2 and of 40, for example, like in this case, and as much as the person hyperventilated isn't really moving that significant, that means the person requires higher amount of ventilation for this constant CO2 value to be moving and becoming like lesser in amount. Okay, so this is the first idea behind this graph. Moving on to the second graph. This second graph basically shows the three chemical responses. We have the CO2 response, we have the pH response, and the oxygen response. So basically, those three responses are very similar in terms of concept, like concept-wise. Basically, we have the same exact thing. This y-axis is the ventilation. This x-axis is the partial pressure of the carbon dioxide. Same goes in here, ventilation. Here it shows the pH. Here the y-axis is the ventilation compared to the x-axis, which is the partial pressure of the oxygen. So basically, the more we will hyperventilate, the carbon dioxide levels should all the way go down normally. The more we hyperventilate or have enough oxygen levels in the blood, the pH shouldn't go to the left side, it should go to the right side. That means it shouldn't be high in having H plus ions. No, it should be more in having the bicarbonate ions, more into the alkaline levels. Same goes all the way into the oxygen response. The more we hyperventilate, or the more we breathe, or the more we have normal levels of oxygen, the more the body won't really need that compensatory mechanism, and the more we will have normal body physiological function. And the carbon dioxide in this case will be low, like lower than the oxygen, which is actually considered to be normal. So this is basically the idea behind those three graphs, and this is just a simple explanation. Now moving on to this thing, it's basically here comparing the difference between the central and peripheral ventilatory response. It basically just says in here, we have the central CR, which is the central response, and the peripheral response. Now, in regard to the central chemoreceptor and the peripheral chemoreceptor, the CCR and the PCR, it says that if, for example, for whatsoever reason, we have the total response of the carbon dioxide is مثلا high antibody, we have the H plus ions, مثلا here is 80, okay, compared مثلا to the oxygen levels, which is low. Usually, if we have, for example, high carbon dioxide, we're going to have high of the H plus. So it basically here, the concept behind this thing, it says that the response of the chemoreceptor that's central, it's sometimes stronger than the response to the peripheral chemoreceptors, okay? So this is the idea behind this thing, which is the central chemoreceptor and the peripheral chemoreceptor. As we said, it shows the total response of the CO2 and the total response of the oxygen in compared to the H plus, which is the same as the carbon dioxide, high carbon dioxide, and if we have low oxygen, the central chemoreceptor will respond very high if we have high H plus ions compared to the peripheral chemoreceptor. Here the response is 20%. In compared to the oxygen levels, the peripheral chemoreceptor will be more sensitive to it, like 100% sensitive compared to the central chemoreceptor. Okay, so now moving on to the almost last two graphs, it basically just says more about the acute and the chronic hypercapnia. The first graph is acute and chronic hypercapnia compared to the second graph, which is the acute and chronic hypoxia. The idea behind both of them is almost the same. Like hypercapnia is basically high carbon dioxide levels in the blood, okay, compared to the acute and chronic hypoxia, which is low oxygen levels in the blood, okay, with very minor differences in terms of the graph. As you can see here in the graph of hypoxia, it's quite different compared to the graph of the hypercapnia. So basically, the theory or the concept behind both the graphs are almost the same with very minor differences. So let's explain like what is this graph exactly about. So as we can see here, this is the y-axis and this is the x-axis. The y-axis basically shows the ventilation. X-axis is like the period of time, the period of time, either the time or days. Okay. Now we have this is the threshold. Let's say this red line is basically the ventilation. The person is ventilating. Suddenly, we have very high carbon dioxide levels in the blood. Once we have this thing, normally, the body should try as much as possible to compensate so that we try as much as possible to get rid of the CO2 and equalize or have higher levels of oxygen in the blood. How this thing would be happening by the chemoreceptors, which are the PCR, the peripheral, and the central chemoreceptor. We try as much as possible to compensate to that by hyperventilating, by tachypnea, by having vasoconstriction, increasing the blood pressure and everything, so that we try as much as possible to increase the level of oxygen in the blood. Now, what happens exactly is that we have in here the more the graph goes up is that we have higher ventilation. If this graph, the red line or the red curve goes down, that means we have low ventilation. So once we have this stimulus, that we have high carbon dioxide, we will have, as we said, the compensatory mechanisms. Okay, now let's say acutely, once you have hypercapnia, acutely or immediately, what's going to happen is that hyperventilation is going to happen and all other compensatory mechanisms we talk about. Then what about chronically? If somebody also has whatever illness they have, and they have chronic hypercapnia, will the response be exactly the same, like the response of having hyperventilation, tachypnea, tachycardia, till the end of the compensatory mechanisms? Will they exactly be the same as behaving acutely? The answer is no, because the body usually gets tired. The receptors, chemoreceptor, mechanoreceptor, baroreceptor, those receptors and the body in general is tired of having this continuous compensatory mechanism to try as much as possible to compensate and decrease the CO2 with increasing the oxygen. So the response chronically will not be exactly the same as acutely, and this actually is represented in this graph. So basically what happens is that somebody's gonna breathe normally. Suddenly, as we said, CO2 is gonna increase. Oops, there's something wrong in the body. Acutely, what's gonna happen is that we have the PCR and the CCR, which is the peripheral and the central chemoreceptor will sense this thing. Both of them will get stimulated. Yalla, please, let's start. Try as much as possible to hyperventilate, and all other compensatory mechanisms will be actually started. In this case, it just shows in this graph, they basically just show how the hyperventilation thing will happen. So as we can see here, hyperventilation is gonna happen. Excellent. That means the body is trying as much as possible to compensate the CO2, get rid of it, and have oxygen in the blood or in the body. Amazing. Suddenly we can see, unfortunately, the graph is decreasing. We can see the first difference is that the graph is decreasing. In other words, the ventilation is decreasing. And we still have this PCO2 stimulus is continuous. So once this PCO2 stimulus comes, which is acutely, we have very amazing compensatory mechanism. If for whatsoever reason this CO2 is continuous and it's being chronic, that means the body will not have the ability to always compensate this thing, and the graph will significantly be decreasing, with having not only two receptors working, but only one chemoreceptor, which is the peripheral chemoreceptor, will be working in a stronger way to get rid of this CO2 in a chronic condition. Because of that, generally speaking, acutely, the response isn't similar to the chronic response. Once we have CO2, the acute response will be way stronger compared to if we have chronic amount of CO2 in the body, or if we have chronic hypercapnia response in the body, they won't be exactly the same, as we can see in this graph. So this graph, I'll just have a very quick review, represents the acute and chronic hypercapnia. The response of both of them won't be similar. In regard to here, if we have a CO2 stimulus, we have very high compensatory mechanism, and we try as much as possible to remove this CO2, compared all the way to the chronic response, where we have the only one of the receptors is going to be working, which is the PCR, the peripheral chemoreceptor. This is the first thing. يلا الحين we have, and basically this thing basically explain it. We can just have a very quick review. It basically says here that if we have an increase in the CO2 levels, that means that we're going to have high LDH plus, high acid in the body, low pH. The CSF, as we said, will definitely feel or sense that we have this high H levels in the blood, and we will enhance definitely ventilation, and we will have hyperventilation. We also have other mechanisms in the body which also try to compensate not only actually the chemoreceptor, baroreceptor, and mechanoreceptor. We have the kidney, the lungs, and maybe many other compensatory mechanisms that actually can happen in the body that will help in compensating this thing. Okay, and by time everything will get tired, and the graph, as we can see, will definitely be all the way going down, and we won't have the exact same compensatory mechanism as we had acutely. Now, moving on to the second paragraph, which is the acute and chronic hypoxia. The graph, as we can see, is quite different from the acute and chronic hypercapnia. So, basically the concept is almost the same. For example, we have the y-axis or the ventilation, and the x-axis shows the days or the period of time in general. Now, once we have, for example, a person or a patient who has high carbon dioxide levels in the blood, what's going to happen? A compensatory mechanism is going to happen, hyperventilation. As we can see in the y-axis, ventilation is going to all the way increase by having this curve thing going to increase. Now, if this thing chronically, we have a chronic hypoxia, that means the body is going to be tired. It won't be always available to compensate this thing, and it will the compensatory mechanism will be almost in a straight line, which is not all the way going higher. That means the ventilation rate won't continuously be increasing, and it will be doing its function in a linear way, or not in a way that's going to increase the oxygen levels and get rid of the CO2 levels in the blood. And here it says the main difference between the hypercapnia and hypoxia in this statement. It just says if a person or if a patient had the hypercapnia, the acute exposure is way more potent and stimulus to breathe than the chronic exposure. As we already know, acutely everything will be very high, very amazing. The compensation is going to be really so strong compared to the chronic. And the difference between the hypercapnia and the hypoxia is that it's not really the same in the hypoxia and the hypercapnia. As we can see in the hypoxia graph, it increases, the hyperventilation increases, and then it stays almost constant compared to the hypercapnia graph, which shows that the ventilation increases, and then it won't stay constant. It's gonna significantly by time be decreasing, and we will have in the hypercapnia, the peripheral, the chemoreceptors are gonna also play a major role, and at the end, as we can see, the peripheral chemoreceptor will be the only one regulating not both the CCR and the PCR. So this is the I hope it's quite a simple explanation to the graphs previously. This slide basically explains the regulation of breathing once we have exercise. So you guys tell me, once somebody is having an exercise, so what's gonna happen? Will they have hyper or hyperventilation? Exactly, they'll be having a hyperventilation, which is a normal compensatory mechanism, and all of this normal physiological function is going to be regulated by the cerebral cortex, by the brainstem, by the chemoreceptors, by the receptors in general, chemoreceptor, photoreceptor, mechanoreceptor, trying as much as possible to control the respiratory muscles, which are the diaphragm, the external intercostal muscle, to as much as possible try to compensate this exercise, or try as much as possible to compensate not having as much as possible accumulation of CO2 by hyperventilating and everything. And they will all intercorrelate or interconnect with one another to have normal stimulus, direct stimulus, stimulation feedback. All the muscles, the respiratory muscles will be working, the mechanoreceptor, all baroreceptor, mechanoreceptor, all of them are going to be functioning one another, so that they will try, as we said, to have normal physiological function while exercising, while not exercising. They want the body wants ourself, or to have normal respiratory oxygen and carbon dioxide levels. Either we're exercising or we're relaxing or resting, so that all of those things happens by having a normal regulatory functions. Okay, so here it basically just says that the normal ventilation, or the maximum average ventilation of men, is quite higher than women, which is basically for men it's 100 liters per minute, compared to women, which is 70 liters per minute. We have there is no any single change in the arterial CO2, pH, and PO2 while exercising, and this happens because we try as much as possible to compensate any changes. For example, we might have, if, for example, somebody is exercising and they're breathing a lot in a way that the body wants to use the energy, or wants to use the anaerobic mechanisms instead of using the aerobic mechanisms. That means by using this anaerobic mechanism, we're going to be using the lactic acid, we're going to be using H plus, the lactate, in those mechanisms. And as we said, if we're going to have hyperventilation, we will have a low or reduced levels of the carbon dioxide. Okay, so moving on to our last slide here, it basically shows the stimuli of of the ventilation in general, the voluntary ventilation. So basically, this graph shows a couple of different figures. The y-axis shows the ventilation, and the x-axis shows a couple of things. We have number one, the rest, the partial pressure of the oxygen, the pH, the CO2 once the person is exercising, and the MVV, which is basically the maximum voluntary ventilation. Now, those basically graphs are representing the ventilation rate that's required. Once you are, for example, right now you're sitting, that means you're at rest. The ventilation rate won't be the same as a person, for example, who's exercising. Let's say, مثلا here, it's, let's say 5. Here, let's say it's approximately 100 when a person is exercising. So this norm, basically, this is considered to be normal. Why? Because the body in exercising is trying to compensate as much as possible by ventilating or by hyperventilating to have as much oxygen as possible in the body and getting rid of the carbon dioxide. So this is normal. For example, let's say here, if somebody is taking normal oxygen, it won't be the same as somebody who has مثلا high carbon dioxide levels. The body is trying as much as possible to compensate to get rid of this high CO2 by hyperventilating. Same goes to the MVV, which is MVV is basically the highest amongst all ventilatory or ventilation required from those previous things. Why is the MVV highest? Because they discovered that during the maximum voluntary ventilation. This is actually available once a patient is required to do something called as the pulmonary function test. There's basically a formula for this pulmonary function test, and it's basically like a device which is used in a specific way to be inserted into the patient, and the patient is going to be used to breathe into it and everything, so that they will check for their pulmonary function test. And they discovered that while using this device by the patient, this is where the maximum ventilation is used, or the maximum voluntary ventilation is actually available. Yes, so this is the idea behind this slide, and here it just says that for any healthy adult, the value is considered to be the ventilation value is considered to be 160 liters per minute. So this is the end of our lecture, and here we have we belong together. So yeah, so this is it, and this is the code. If you guys can kindly scan to have your kind feedback on this lecture. And if you kindly have any questions, please feel free to drop into the chat box. And I'm always more than happy to answer your questions. If you guys have any question right now and you have any question later on, please feel free to just approach me through my mobile number. And I hope all of you the best of luck. And inshallah, I hope you just get benefited from this lecture. So if you have any questions, please feel free. Any questions?